My daughter, Jessica, is getting married, and we're heading to a meet and greet with both families. When we entered the designated room, Jessica's in-laws-to-be, John and Linda, were already seated. They seemed to have been talking about something, as their faces wore an eerily amused smile. I wondered what was so funny as I looked at the table, and saw that there were settings for 3 on our side. I realized this was a sly way of harassing us, and said to myself, I see. Please have a seat. Oh, it's just the 2 of you? We're a single-parent family. I lifted the corners of my eyes and replied as calmly as I could. But Linda still had a lingering smile. Right, I remember now. Maybe you should take this in a Tupperware? It must be tough being in a single-parent household. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress her laughter. Despite her harsh words, I didn't even bat an eyelid. Seeing this, Jessica tapped my shoulder. That's terrible. Mom, let's go home. Why's that? If it means you have to suffer, I'd rather not get married. Touched by my daughter's kindness, I smiled and firmly said, That's not necessary. Just wait a moment. Then, a female staff member came from behind with a takeaway box the size of a lunchbox, offering it to Linda with the words, Please, take this with you. John and Linda were taken aback, looking surprised. If being low income is tough, please, take this. What? My name is Emily Johnson. I'm in my 50s, feeling the midpoint of my life deeply as I live in a slightly spacious 3-bedroom house with my daughter, Jessica. When Jessica is at school, the emptiness of the living room feels lonely. During such times, I make it a routine to prepare 2 cups of tea. One for me, and the other for my late husband. Looking at the cup I poured for him, I feel comforted, thinking he might be here with me. He passed away from cancer about 20 years ago, just when we were about to start treatment. Just before he passed away, while lying in bed, he implored me about our only daughter, Jessica. Please take good care of Jessica. She'll surely do great. At that time, Jessica was too young to remember her father well. To keep my promise to my husband and not to let her feel lonely or hurt, I raised Jessica with all my might. Putting my needs second, I balanced work, house chores, and parenting, managing to send her to college even as a single parent. I might be biased, but Jessica turned out to be a beautiful, kind, and hardworking woman, excelling in her studies. She's my pride and joy. After graduating, she got a job at a corporation and started living on her own. I can't always rely on you, Mom. I'll start repaying you back, bit by bit. Don't worry about me. Just do your best. Eat properly, don't stay up late, and remember, I'm not a kid anymore, I'll be fine. What are you saying? You'll always be my precious child. On the eve of her move, Jessica and I talked about the past, the future, and her father until late into the night. We never ran out of memories to share, losing track of time. Even after she started living alone, my smartphone would frequently light up with her messages. From the struggles of unpacking and cooking, to her experiences at work and stories about her colleagues. Every message made me feel as if she was right there with me. Jessica must be feeling lonely in her first time living alone. But after half a year, the messages from her gradually became less frequent, changing from every 3 days to once a week. She's really doing her best. There's a saying that the absence of reliance is a good reliance. The lack of messages probably means that Jessica's days are fulfilling. Thinking this, even the tea I made for my husband seems to nod in agreement. When about 1.5 years had passed since Jessica started her job, on a warm, late autumn day, I received a call. It was Jessica, and as I answered, wondering what was up, she sounded excited, saying, It's been a while. Mom, listen, I want you to meet someone this Sunday. Are you free? Oh, it's been a while indeed. I'm free this Sunday. Great, I'll come home around noon, okay? Sure, that's fine. Be careful on your way. It's been a long time since I've seen you, Mom. You're gonna be surprised, see you then. After saying that, Jessica hung up, and I was left in silence. I wondered when was the last time I had a phone conversation with her. Her unusually happy tone also caught my attention, but when Sunday came, I was indeed surprised, just like Jessica said. At the door, Jessica appeared with a young man named Ethan Parker. He wasn't dressed casually but in a neat, casual suit, looking a bit tense. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan Parker, dating Jessica." He introduces himself, tall and slender, with a face as handsome as a model's. He gave the impression of a polite and good young man. "Oh, Jessica has been in your care. Please come in." I offered him guest slippers and invited them to the living room. As I made tea and we sat at the table, Jessica shared her recent news and introduced him. Then, blushing, she said, "The reason I wanted you to meet him is, I want to marry Ethan." Marry! Though I had a hunch, it still struck a chord to hear that Jessica had found someone. I maintained my composure and looked at Ethan, who now seemed more serious than before. "Yes, I proposed to Jessica recently. And we wanted to meet with you, her mother." After a brief silence, I said, "I see. I didn't know Jessica had such a wonderful person in her life." "Ethan, Jessica grew up without a father. I raised her all by myself." "Yes, Jessica told me she was raised by a single mother." "Jessica is my treasure, my only daughter. Will you truly protect and make her happy?" "Of course. I'm confident I can make her happier than anyone else in this world." Ethan responded confidently, not intimidated by my demeanor. Had he faltered here, I might not have consented to their marriage. "I understand. Please take good care of Jessica." When I said this, the two exchanged relieved glances and smiled happily. Seeing them like this, I naturally found myself smiling as well. I think he would have smiled in the same way if he were here. A few months after sending off a happy Jessica and Ethan, Jessica took a long break and came home. She happily talked about her work and Ethan, but occasionally, she would have a troubled expression, which worried me. When asked, she would avoid the topic and say, "It's nothing, Mom." Jessica has a habit of shrugging her shoulders when she wants to talk about something or is lying. She shrugged this time too, so I was sure something was bothering her. "Hey, Jessica, how about we visit that new cafe that just opened? This one here." I pointed to the cafe on my smartphone screen. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, I've been wanting to go there. They're known for their original coffee. It's popular at work too." Then it's settled. The next day, Jessica and I walked to the cafe in the cool air. It was deep into winter, and the brown fallen leaves crunched under our feet. We ordered coffee to go and walked for a while. "Mom, thanks for accepting Ethan and me. He seems sincere. Take good care of each other." When we reached a large park, Jessica started to open up. "Actually, I went to greet Ethan's parents. They didn't seem to think much of me." Her story went back a month. She had gone with Ethan to greet his parents, John and Linda. But they seemed skeptical of her from the start. "Hello, I'm Jessica Johnson. I'm dating Ethan." "Ethan, are you sure about this girl?" Linda interrupted Jessica's greeting. "What do you mean? Just look at her. She looks poor, her clothes, her makeup. She's not a match for Ethan." Instead of congratulations, they openly criticized Jessica. "Mom, that's rude. How can you say that about my girlfriend?" "You think so too, right?" Linda even sought agreement from John, who simply nodded in affirmation. "Oh, is your family very poor? Do your parents work?" "My mother works, and my father passed away when I was young." "A single mother? I thought as much." John seemed oddly satisfied and scoffed. "Dad? It must be for the money. Ethan, our family is of a distinguished lineage. You shouldn't be with this kind of woman." "How can you say that? Jessica is different. I know her better than anyone." "You're just naive. There are plenty of people who would marry for our wealth." Shockingly, John even suggested introducing Ethan to a daughter of an acquaintance. Linda agreed and seemed pleased with the idea. That's a good idea. After all, this girl's father works for a major listed company. She's not a match for a single-parent family. You think so too, right, Ethan? Seeing his mother happily agree, Ethan raised his voice. Enough, both of you. That day, the conversation went nowhere, and Ethan had to lead Jessica away from his parents' house. Later, Ethan told Jessica that both John and Linda had a strong sense of elitism. Jessica, I'm really sorry. My parents said such awful things and hurt you. He apologized repeatedly and promised to always protect her. Listening to this on a park bench, I was struggling to contain my anger. So, what did his parents say about the marriage? We went again last week, and despite their sarcasm, Ethan convinced them to accept us. Are you okay with that? Jessica bit her lip and shrugged. Yeah, I'm okay. We won't be living together, and I can handle it. All right. It was clear that the relationship between the Parkers and Jessica was strained. Even with Ethan's promise to protect her, there would be limits. Knowing the difficulties ahead, I wished I could advise her to reconsider the marriage. However, having already given my consent, that was no longer an option. Even in just this short period since the greeting, Jessica looked so downcast. The thought of her having to wear that sad expression for the foreseeable future was unbearable. About the meeting between both families, I think maybe I shouldn't attend. Why? Because I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I'd rather not have the meeting if it's going to upset you. Until then, Jessica had been acting bravely, but now her eyes seemed to well up. Though she didn't cry, she was evidently trying to spare me from the same unpleasant feelings. Her kindness pained me, but I smiled. Don't worry about me. Let's have the meeting properly, so your marriage is recognized by everyone. Under the cold sky, Jessica and I sipped our cold coffee on our way back home. When Jessica told Ethan about wanting to go ahead with the meeting, he seemed very surprised and worried about her. You don't have to push yourself, he said. I'm fine. Mom doesn't mind either. If that's what you want, I'll talk to my parents about it. On the day of the meeting, Jessica and I went to the venue. We were silent, but I decided to face the situation with my head held high and my chest puffed out. We took a taxi to the designated famous hotel, taking deep breaths at the entrance. However, Jessica was still anxious. When the hotel was chosen, Linda had made a snide remark, adding to Jessica's unease. That famous hotel featured in commercials. I know it's a place unfamiliar to your family. Such unnecessary comments should have been brushed off, but Jessica took them to heart and completely shrank into herself. I gently embraced Jessica's shoulder, signaling with my eyes, it's going to be okay, and we started walking together. At the entrance, Ethan, who seemed to have arrived earlier, was waiting for the elevator. Thank you for adjusting your schedules to meet today. Ethan looked much more nervous than the last time we met, sweating even in the cold of winter. No, thank you. We appreciate your efforts today. Well, you might have heard from Jessica, but this hotel is where my father works, and... Ethan stuttered, clearly worried his parents might say something offensive. Given their attitude towards Jessica, I expected they would treat me the same. I replied with confidence. Yes, I am aware. There's no need to worry. Besides, you look more handsome when you're confident. Ethan looked up sharply, just as the elevator doors opened, and an announcement indicated we should proceed upstairs. We stepped in and rode up to the designated floor. Entering the assigned room, John and Linda were already seated, smirking in a way that seemed both creepy and amused. Glancing at the table, I noticed that only 3 sets of dishes were prepared on our side. I immediately understood this subtle form of harassment. Oh, we've been waiting for you. Please take a seat. Oh? Just the 2 of you? We are a single-parent family. I replied, lifting the corners of my eyes, trying to stay calm. But Linda's smile turned into a sneer. Oh, right. Why don't you take this home in a container? You must be poor. Single mothers must have such low incomes, always hungry, right? That's right. The income of single-parent families is well known to be low. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, barely holding back her laughter. Despite the shocking comments, I remained unmoved. Seeing this, Ethan couldn't help but cry out. "Dad, Mom, stop it right now. This is too disrespectful." At that moment, Jessica tapped my shoulder. "This is terrible. Mom, let's go." "Why?" "If it means my mom, who sacrificed everything for me, has to suffer like this, I don't want to get married." Hearing this, Ethan turned around in shock. "Jessica!" I looked at them and said firmly, "That's not necessary. Just wait a moment." Then, a female staff member approached from behind with a lunchbox-sized pack and offered it to Linda. "Please, take this to go." Linda and John were taken aback, looking utterly confused. "If you're concerned about low incomes, please, take this." "What?" "At least Mrs. Johnson here is far from being poor." The staff member, speaking clearly, placed the pack down and stepped back gracefully. Linda and John were indignant. "You! How dare you do this?" "That's right. You're fired, fired." "Right, dear?" "Both of you, please calm down. She's an old friend of mine. The rude ones here are you too." The woman turned to me, smiled briefly, and said, "The division head is always so busy." "Division head!" Linda and John's reactions were comically exaggerated, almost tumbling off their chairs. John was sweating profusely, not just on his forehead but all over his face. I hadn't intended to hide it, but I am the daughter of the president of the group company that owns this famous hotel. I have worked for this company for many years, continuing even after marriage. When I was pregnant with Jessica, I took maternity leave like any other employee and raised her while working in place of my husband. By the time Jessica entered college, my efforts were recognized, and I was promoted to division head, thanks to recommendations from colleagues, but this couple was unaware of it. "Are both of you listening?" I addressed the two lying on the floor with a firm voice. "Today, we came here to discuss the marriage between my dear daughter and your son, Ethan. It seems you have spoken very poorly of my daughter." I glared at them, causing John and Linda to shudder. "I replaced my husband, who passed away from illness when my daughter was young, working hard to provide her with both love and education." Ethan swallowed nervously. "I trust my daughter and the person she has chosen. Even if they come from a family that judges others by income and behaves rudely, I see Ethan as a respectful and fine young man, an important addition to our family." I paused for a breath before continuing. "I believe you too care for your child. So, I ask again, do you accept the marriage of my daughter and Ethan?" The room fell silent. John and Linda were trembling, and Ethan seemed to hold his breath. Jessica had never seen this side of me before. She was speechless behind me. "Well?" Linda looked resentfully at John. He, pale-faced, adjusted his posture and hurriedly said, "Of course, division head. We look forward to a close relationship in the future. I am here today not as a division head, but as Jessica's mother," I firmly stated, looking at John. "And if we talk about work, aren't you soon to leave this place?" "What do you mean?" I had already investigated John's reputation within the company. When Jessica told me Ethan's father was John Parker, the name rang a bell. His disdainful attitude towards Jessica and being a hotel employee was a dead giveaway. He had a bad reputation in the hotel, and I had often heard about John's high-handed behavior towards his subordinates. Additionally, he was reported to be absent from work under the pretext of meetings, and a personnel hearing was imminent. "That's why you should really reflect on your own actions," I told the speechless John. Linda suddenly stood up, her face red with rage, and lunged at me with a wild scream. But when I easily dodged, she fell over with a groan, like a squashed frog. To Linda, who was sprawled on the floor, I delivered a final warning. "Also, know this, if you ever interfere with Jessica and Ethan's happiness, I won't stay silent." After pinning down the helpless couple, I urged Jessica and Ethan to leave with me. Of course, I left their handling to my childhood friend. Half a year passed, and it was now summer. The sticky humidity was tough to bear, especially in my 50s. The weather forecast promised another day of intense heat, making an umbrella essential outdoors. As I walked to the supermarket, I thought about what happened afterward. After the meeting, Ethan had apologized to Jessica and me several times. "I'm really sorry for my parents' disrespectful behavior." He was so apologetic he even bowed to the floor, prompting me to quickly lift him up. "You don't need to go that far. Your sincerity is apparent. It's just so embarrassing. I don't want anything to do with such parents anymore." "But they are the ones who raised you, aren't they?" "No, my aunt and uncle raised me. My parents left me with them until I went to college." I had always wondered why Ethan's character was so different from his parents' arrogance. It turns out his aunt and uncle, who raised him, were decent people. Recently, Ethan formally cut ties with his parents after they came begging for money. After the meeting, Linda called Ethan in a panic. "Ethan, your dad lost his job. They said it was due to job negligence." But Ethan responded indifferently. "That's tough. Don't talk like it's someone else's problem. We're out of money, you need to send us some." "Mom, I know about it. Uncle told me you have a spending habit, right?" "What are you talking about?" "If you could just get rid of that habit, wouldn't our lives be more comfortable? Please stop relying on me. That guy, always saying unnecessary things." After that, there were several more phone calls. Linda had exhausted her savings because of her spending habit, and even John's retirement fund was running low. Struggling financially, Linda and John were not only asking for money but also insisted on speaking to the division manager. They kept calling all the time, morning, noon, and night, so eventually, Ethan's patience ran out. "Both of you, just stop it. I don't want to cause trouble for my wife or mother-in-law." Saying that, he abruptly ended the call and blocked their numbers. Not only that, Ethan changed his cell phone number and moved to a new apartment with Jessica, changing their address. Of course, he didn't tell his parents, so John and Linda had no way of knowing what happened to Ethan and Jessica afterwards. This removed any disturbances in the couple's happy married life. From what Jessica told me, since then, they have been living peaceful days together. As for me, I've managed to build a good relationship with the newlyweds, having meals together 2 or 3 times a month. Also, this incident made me realize a big misunderstanding. I had been working hard to ensure Jessica didn't face hardships raising her on my own, but in doing so, I had completely stopped going on trips, which was my hobby. Jessica thought she was the reason I gave up my hobby. My efforts to spare Jessica any worry or hardship ended up making her worried about me. "Don't worry about me from now on. I want you to spend time and money for yourself, Mom." Until Jessica said that, I was enjoying living alone at home, but since then, I started going on trips on weekends. I, who loved domestic travel, started visiting places I wanted to see and places with fond memories. Strangely enough, as I worked hard in my daily job, I began to feel it's okay to spend time and money on myself. Moreover, exploring recent lodging facilities has even benefited my work. Projects have been progressing more smoothly, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Thinking of this as thanks to Jessica, I finished paying at the store and left. Today's shopping was also for ingredients to cook dinner together with the 3 of us. Looking up, I saw Jessica coming from the opposite side. "Mom, are you okay? Don't overdo it, let me carry that for you." Jessica hurried over and easily lifted the shopping bag in my right hand. "Oh, thank you. Shall we go then?" "Yeah, Ethan's gonna come right after he finishes work. He's been looking forward to your summer vegetable curry," Jessica said, smiling sweetly. "I'll have to make plenty then." Recently, there was happy news. Jessica is pregnant. This made not only me and Ethan happy, but Jessica as well. I'm secretly planning to send clothes and toys for the grandchild, keeping it a surprise for the two. Though I wonder if it's too early, I know the child will be here before we know it. I'm already eagerly awaiting the day I can meet this new life. I'm Mary, 42 years old. 10 years ago, I married a man I met at work. He was divorced with a child, whom I've raised as my own while working. During this time, my husband started his own business and, despite many ups and downs, persevered as the president until the end. My stepson turned 20 this year. He left home 2 years ago to attend a university in a neighboring state and seems to be managing well living alone. But our ordinary life changed abruptly. My husband passed away. He died of a heart attack, and there was nothing that could be done. While I was overwhelmed with grief, there were countless things to take care of, including the funeral and various arrangements, and before I knew it, the day of the funeral arrived. The funeral was a small, family-only affair, as my husband wished. His parents had already passed away, and being an only child, the only family he had by blood was our son. My parents and siblings didn't get along with my husband, so we didn't invite them. It was just me and our son at the very small funeral. Before the coffin was taken away, my son came to me in the waiting room. "What's wrong?" I asked him as usual, but he didn't respond. His expression was almost blank. When I asked again, he suddenly started saying incomprehensible things. "That's enough, you parasite." "What?" "Stop clinging to Dad. You just came in later and started sucking up all his money. You fake mother parasite, just renounce your inheritance and disappear. The real family is just me." After saying that, he left the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed painfully in my heart. After that, we didn't talk, and as soon as the funeral was over, he went back to his dorm. I couldn't ask him what he meant by his words. I tried to contact him, but my messages were left unread, and he ignored my calls. I couldn't confirm anything, and it was already the next day. Today, I tried contacting him several times, but still no response. And with work tomorrow, it's difficult to just leave for his dorm in the neighboring state. So, I stopped by a convenience store to pick up some light food and drinks, then headed home. When I entered my apartment, I noticed a sliver of light under the door to the living room. Hesitantly, I approached and opened the door quietly. To my surprise, there was my son, sitting on the living room sofa, seemingly waiting for me. "What are you doing here?" After moving out for his dorm, my son only came home for the holidays, like Christmas and New Year's. Even during the recent wake and funeral, he didn't stop by here, he just went straight from his dorm and back. Ignoring my obvious confusion, my son confronted me in a calm voice, or rather, a slightly mocking tone. "Was something inconvenient for you? Didn't want to be seen doing whatever you please now that Dad's gone?" "What do you mean?" "Just figured you'd be living it up in your own way now that Dad's not around." "In many ways." "That's not true at all." "Yeah, whatever. Anyway, that's not important. Did you eat?" "Huh? Are you hungry?" "If you haven't eaten, I can make something simple." It was getting late. If he had been waiting in the room alone, he might be hungry. As a mother, it was natural for me to offer, but it seemed to irritate him. Suddenly, he slammed his hand on the table in front of him and glared at me with hostility. "You! Didn't I just say it?" "What?" "How long are you gonna keep shamelessly squatting in this house? You fake mother parasite, just renounce your inheritance and disappear. The real family is just me." The same lines, the same insults as before, came flying out from my son. What's really going on? Did something happen? "What? I only put up with you because Dad was around. Who would think of someone like you as my mother? You just leeched off Dad while he was the CEO, sucking up the sweet life. Just get lost now." I was at a loss for words. Indeed, since remarrying 10 years ago, my son hardly ever turned to me for affection. He grew up protected by his kind father, having experienced his parents' divorce at a young age. I felt that my presence had robbed him of his gentle father. So, for the past 10 years, I tried my best to raise him. I made daily lunches, took him to and from extracurricular activities, and created many family-like moments. Even during his rebellious phase, my husband struggled with all sorts of things, but we faced it together, believing it was a phase every child goes through. But it seems my efforts never reached him. My son's painful words inflicted deep damage on my heart. I painfully realized that our relationship was only possible because of the presence of my husband, his blood father, and my husband. My son, openly hostile towards me. This is probably the real face of my son. Perhaps, no matter what I say as his stepmother, it won't reach him anymore. So, I decided to at least listen to his last wish.
Yes. No matter what happens, you gotta keep living. Absolutely. Huh? Don't you act all high and mighty, you fake.
The words from my son, filled with such intensity, felt like they were piercing through me. What do you want? Get out of here. What?
This house belonged to Dad, which means it's now mine. No place for a fake family like you.
Kevin.
Shut up. Don't talk to me. Don't even say my name. I really want to tell you to get out right now. But I'm kind because you did take care of me when I was a kid. I'll give you a week's notice. This is my house, I can't live in that tiny apartment forever. Just hand over the place and get lost.
The last look my son gave me left deep wounds in my heart. With that, he left for his dorm. A week later. After work, I checked my personal phone and saw an unbelievable number of missed calls and messages. Most of them were from Kevin, just as I expected. I turned off my phone for a while and headed home. After a quick dinner and a bath, I turned my phone back on after a few hours. As soon as I did, the sound of countless messages and missed call notifications wouldn't stop. I tried to go through them, and the moment I marked the messages as read, Kevin called, as if he had been waiting. Hello?
Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing? Don't mess with me.
I could hear my son's anger through the phone. It wasn't surprising. The first message had come in the morning.
Calm down first. I can't talk to you if you don't speak properly. What? You're the one making it impossible to talk properly. What's this about the house being up for sale?
So, it was about that. Not really surprising.
How about we meet and talk? Where are you?
Outside the house. I see. So, you saw the for sale sign and started bombarding me with calls. Makes sense.
Of course.
He must have been there since the morning. Well, there's nowhere else for him to be, I guess. For now, you can still get into the house. If you have the key, go in and wait. It's completely empty, though.
What? The key still works?
He hadn't even tried it. I suddenly remembered my husband, who had a simple and slow-witted side, just like my son Kevin. He must have tried the key after I suggested it. I could hear the sound of the door opening through the phone. He probably stepped into the entrance, relieved and slightly relaxed, judging by the deep breath I heard. Yet, he couldn't hide his emotions or embarrassment, and his voice came out harshly.
Just hurry up and get here.
The call abruptly ended, and I let out a heavy sigh. In the midst of my hectic daily life, having just relaxed at home, honestly, going out was a hassle. There were still a mountain of things to do. But I knew I had to have a proper conversation with my son, for various reasons. Resigned to this, I put my coat back on and headed to my former home. As I opened the unlocked door, I saw the cold hallway leading to the lit living room. Walking quietly over the chilly floor, I found Kevin sitting cross-legged in the middle of the empty living room.
You're late. How long do you expect people to wait?
What? I came right after the phone call ended. My stronger tone surprised Kevin a bit. But ever since we met, he was always biting back, not just at me, but also at his biological father, my husband. He wasn't going to back down now and lashed out even more.
Are you kidding me? What's with the for sale sign?
The house is too big for one person, so I thought about selling it. Your words helped me make up my mind. Thanks for that. The cold floor of winter was draining the warmth from my body. I turned on the air conditioner as I always did.
What? You can't just sell Dad's house.
Oh. But this is my house. What? This house is mine, legally in my name. What? You didn't know?
Don't lie to me. How could you afford a place like this? You think I'm stupid just because I'm young?
No, wasn't it you who treated me with a condescending attitude? Of course, I wouldn't say that out loud. No, it's legally in my name. I can show you the registration if you want. His real thoughts spilled out as I spoke with deliberate firmness. How can someone with no money like you afford it? You must have tricked Dad into giving you the money. Just like you wormed your way into his life for his money when he was a CEO. I knew it. Even though my husband and I tried desperately to connect, Kevin never opened up his heart. Correctly speaking, my husband became a president after we got married. But it's true Kevin probably thought some random woman was approaching his father, who could earn enough to start a company. But that doesn't change the fact that you, his son, were freely spending his money, right? What? You thought I didn't know? You sneaked into Dad's company and stole money during your middle and high school years, didn't you? Kevin's face stiffened, not expecting me to know. In reality, it was Kevin, not me, who was siphoning off his father's money. How do you know that? I didn't at first. Your father was desperately hiding it to protect you. But eventually, there were accounting issues, and when pressed, your father admitted, Kevin has been coming to the company and taking money. Dad knew? Of course he knew. How much do you think you took from Dad's company? How would I know? $400,000.
What?
And I think you probably took a few thousand more. Kevin probably didn't even realize he had stolen that much. Seriously? He muttered, shaking his foot slightly. No point asking what he spent it on now. By the way, aren't you wondering how I know all this? Yeah. How do you know so much about Dad's company? You must have been up to no good. The nerve of this kid, accusing me of wrongdoing. It's only natural I know. It's my company. What? That company is mine, so of course I know about it.
No way. That was Dad's company. Don't tell me you took over it.
I wouldn't take over such a small company that was in huge debt. Debt? Yes. Dad's company was on the brink of collapse, so we included it under our group to turn it around. That's why you could go to college and still ask Dad for money. You should be thanking me. What? Dad was indeed the president since he went independent 8 years ago. But eventually, he became an employed president under our group. Like a salaried president. Why? Like I said, the company was in huge debt and had no way out, so we took it under our wing. But why? Your father had no business acumen. He thought he could handle it even after you stole $400,000 from him. That's impossible for that company. It couldn't make up for a $400,000 loss. So, we took it under our group. Dad cut his salary to pay employees, and I paid for all our living expenses and this apartment, which I owned, to reduce the burden. As I spoke calmly, Kevin's reaction was surprisingly mild, beyond his stiffened expression. He seemed unable to keep up with the facts spilling from my mouth. What do you mean, you already owned it? Oh, I've been investing in various things since I was young. I owned several apartments, including this one, which I bought to rent out. When we were looking for a new place to live, I thought it would be suitable for our family. You own several apartments? Yes, real estate income. How did you have money to invest when you were young? Well, who are you, anyway? After living together for 10 years, he's finally asking. He always thought of me as just an ordinary office worker. Lack of interest is a scary thing. Living life ignoring what should be seen and known. Even the most important things, like your own family. My efforts at parenting were one-sided after all. It wasn't just Kevin's fault. The trauma of divorce in his early years, the appearance of a stepmother he couldn't accept, being tossed around by the whims of adults, these are undeniable facts. But neither my husband nor I could find the answer to what to do. We were either not allowed to find it, or we were not allowed to find it. Now, it's just a result. I need to explain this to Kevin too. I calmly laid out the facts to the suspicious Kevin. Do you know Turner Group? I'm the COO there. What? The Turner Group? Remember my maiden name? Ah. Right, Mary Turner. Daughter of the CEO of Turner Group, the heir to the Turner family.
No way. I've never met your family.
That's because your father avoided them. He didn't want to face them after running off with the heir to the Turner family, a divorced man. So, he avoided any meetings.
What?
And then, we had to include his failing company under our group's umbrella. Without even apologizing. That's probably why he lacked business skills. My husband indeed spent his last days running from the Turner family. My family wanted to meet him, but he never did until the end. That's why they weren't invited to the funeral. He was a kind man. Truly kind man. But that kindness also became a source of indulgence and escape. Then that means I'm the grandson of the Turner Group, right? That's true, isn't it? I expected you'd say that. That's why I never told Kevin this truth until now. I thought about telling him when he was in high school, but at that time, it wasn't something he could handle. He would definitely take advantage of the Turner name. In that sense, my husband keeping us distant from my family was a blessing in disguise. Kevin's recent words just confirmed it all. But sadly, you're not the grandson of the Turner Group.
What? If you're my mother, then I'm the grandson. Even if you're a fake mother, that's what the family register says. Don't try to deceive me.
Did you listen to what I said before? What? What did I say? I wonder if the son in front of me remembers. He looks confused, trying to recall, but it seems nothing came to mind. After you said, the only real family is me, I said, no matter what, you have to keep living. Absolutely. Kevin seemed to remember that, but still had a face that said, so what? Clearly, my words and intentions hadn't reached him. His expression confirmed it. You're 20 years old, you should understand the meaning, right? What? You're an adult and a college student, living a life beyond most adults, without thinking about anything?
What? It's normal for parents to support while kids are students.
There's no obligation to support beyond tuition and basic living expenses. What? Parents don't have to pay for your leisure and luxury. At my words, Kevin quickly hid his expensive-looking watch. Surely, there are many other things he obtained with the over $400,000 he used. For a student who doesn't work, they're all disproportionate. Such disproportionate armor is fragile and protects nothing. You're okay with your child being homeless? I don't mind. It's none of my concern anymore. What? You're no longer my concern. Kevin looked at me, his face saying he didn't understand. I've never really understood you, Kevin. From the day your father brought you until today, I couldn't strip away that inappropriate, fragile armor with a direct approach. Your father has passed away. So, we're no longer parent and child. What? I divorced your father after his death, and my last name is back to Turner. You and I are now complete strangers. Well, we've always been strangers, actually.
Why would you do something like that?
Why? You said it yourself. The only real family is you. You never thought of me as family from the start. It worked out perfectly.
That's not true. What am I supposed to do without parent?
I wasn't your family, remember? You said it yourself.
But you should have consulted me.
Consult? To someone who never listened even when I tried to connect? To someone who left and never came back, doing whatever he pleased? Besides, we're not family, so why should I consult you? I smiled sweetly at Kevin, his face turning red and his body trembling. It might be immature. But after these 10 years of looking at him as family, maintaining this relationship of stepmother and child seemed too hard. Suffering under a kind yet indulgent husband and a son who wouldn't accept me as family. I've grown tired over these 10 years. What about college and a place to live? Didn't I already point that out? What? No matter what happens, carry on. Absolutely. You demanded that I renounce my inheritance, so you must have thought about it, right? What? The inheritance. What happened to it? Sadly, your father left debts. Consumer loans, credit card loans, about $600,000. And no savings. What? Debts and no savings? Of course, as you demanded, I renounced the inheritance, so all the dead inheritance goes to you. Good luck.
What? I'm not inheriting any debts. Why are there debts and no savings?
Because you stole from his company, remember? What? I said earlier, besides that $400,000, and there were probably more. Kevin nodded slightly. That was probably used to cover the hole in your father's savings and debts. What? Probably at first, he was trying to cover it up without creating a hole in the company's funds. The company had just started, and there wasn't much savings. Once that ran out, and he couldn't borrow anymore, he struggled for years, trying to deceive, and eventually came crying to me. You had already consumed what should have been your father's inheritance. It's your own doing, isn't it? I wonder if my words reached him. His eyes bloodshot and round, Kevin mutters to himself, exuding an aura of despair. How much is the debt? It was less than $100,000, I think. $100,000? Kevin sat down, holding his head. I'll give you a hint, though. A hint? A hint that might help you survive. What is it? Tell me, quickly. You know, you're asking for a favor. Maybe think about how you ask? Sorry, please tell me. Like I did, you can renounce the inheritance too. Really? His face brightened up, persistently asking how to do it. You can do the procedure yourself if you look it up. Besides, you're a law student, right? Oh wait, you barely got into a decent private university with a recommendation from a low-ranking high school and you're struggling to pass, right? You're technically a junior but haven't even earned 40 credits yet? It makes sense you don't know. I hit a sore spot and he looked down, biting his lip. He might think of me as a mean adult, but it's intentional. He probably hasn't been attending school properly. Less than 40 credits in 3 years. It'll take at least 3 more years to graduate, right? That means 2 more years of tuition. It's far beyond what he could possibly afford to pay. There's some life insurance in your name from your father.
Really?
It's only $60,000. Seeing Kevin's reaction, as if he wanted to exclaim, "Is that all?" I mentioned that it's also due to his actions that there wasn't more money for insurance, causing him to make an uncomfortable face. And you know, there might be taxes on the insurance money, so look into that.
What? Taxes on insurance money?
You're an adult, so maybe look it up? Even after taxes, it should be enough to set up a room and live for a while. If you want to continue college, apply for scholarships. Wait, set up a room? What do you mean? The apartment you're living in now. I'm canceling it at the end of this month. What? Why? It's rented under my name. I have no obligation to keep renting and paying for someone who's not my child. Can't you give me like a month's notice? What? You only gave me a week's notice. You have 3 more weeks. You're 20, an adult. You can rent a room and do anything. I'm just following through on your words. Take responsibility for what you said.
This can't be happening.
He looked to Pirate. But from my perspective, there's much more he could do. I wish he'd realized this. First off, why not sell those inappropriate branded items for cash? What? Like that watch you're wearing, and that bag. Do you really need them right now? I want him to think and struggle to find answers. Kevin, who has grown up indulged in his father's unconditional kindness since his mother wasn't around. He might have been awkwardly showing his neediness to me too. But there's a difference between acceptable neediness and harmful self-indulgence. Actions that hurt others and change lives are not neediness but mere selfishness. It's clear that a 20-year-old adult like him will struggle in life if this continues. I don't hate Kevin. In fact, I still think of him as my dear son. That's why I cut ties with him with the greatest love I could offer. He needs to strive on his own now. I left an envelope with necessary documents in front of the still stunned Kevin. I'm sure he will understand. With that hope, I softly stroked his hair for the first time in years and quietly left the former home. 3 years have passed since my husband's death. Every year on his anniversary, I visit his grave and update him. There, I always find beautiful blue gentians laid out. The person who offers flowers to my husband, who had no siblings or parents. I'm sure it must be the person I have in mind. The meaning of the gentian flower is consoling sorrow. Blue gentians symbolize sincerity. The same color as my husband's favorite tie. It's out of season to get these flowers now. I wonder what he thinks and where he gets them. Every year, I lay white gentians next to the blue ones. Their meaning is sincere character. Like my straightforward, kind husband, watching over Kevin from afar. After finishing my visit, I returned to the office. Even now, after 3 years, I continue my daily life as the COO of Turner Group. COO, please check this. What's this? It's the list of new employees joining our group companies next year. Oh, it's already that time of year, isn't it? Every year around this time, the list of new employees joining the group companies is brought to me. With so many companies, the list is quite long, but it's my personal wish to remember the faces and names of the young people who will be working with us. As I was flipping through the list handed over by my secretary, I came across the list from the company where my husband used to be the president. The current president of that company is really unique and capable, isn't he? You knew him from college, right? The secretary approached with a mug of coffee. Its gentle aroma tickled my nose. Yes, he's been a friend since college. He did great in another company, so I lured him over to lead.
It was a great success. The company has shown significant growth since then.
After my husband's sudden passing, I had to look for a new president. Given the tough business conditions, it was hard to find suitable staff. That meant there was no one suitable within the company either, leading to a tough situation. So I managed to persuade a friend of mine, who had joined a venture company with only a few employees, to join as the new president, and had grown the company to a scale of 100 employees. The existing employees were initially puzzled by the completely different approach of the new president. However, his personality and power led the team, and he continues to elevate the company. I was curious about the new employees he had chosen. As I flipped through the list, I saw a familiar face. It was Kevin. What's this about? I called my friend immediately. Hello. Hey, I didn't hear about this. About what? The new employees starting in April. Oh, were you surprised? He seemed to know what I was talking about. Surprised? Why is he there? Why? Because he's interesting. What? He is quite interesting. His life until 3 years ago was quite heavy, but these last 3 years have amplified his character. I have only high expectations. Listening to my friend, I stared at Kevin's photo on the list. His face had changed significantly, looking much more mature. The expression he had when I last stroked his hair was nowhere to be seen.
Okay. Take care of him.
Like you have to tell me. The call was abruptly ended. Even though he says that, I know he's watching over Kevin. That's good. I thought to myself, feeling relieved. I might never meet Kevin directly, but I'm sure I'll hear about him often.
I can't feel the softness of his hair, but I gently stroke his photo on the paper and smile softly. You miscarried because you weren't careful enough. Christina, haven't you gotten pregnant again since then?
I'm sorry. Blamed by Michael and my mother-in-law, I spent my days in a confined world. I never thought I'd be blamed alone for the miscarriage and not having a child afterward. My heart was completely worn down by this marriage. Then 7 years passed. I miraculously became pregnant. I thought I would never have children again. It was like a bolt from the blue. Michael, who was overjoyed, changed his tune.
Really? Awesome.
Without changing my expression, I calmly said, I want a divorce. What? Shocked, Michael and my mother-in-law faced me as I shouted.
I know all about what Michael has been doing. Stop making a fool of me.
What Michael had done was unforgivable. My anger blazed unceasingly, burning ever higher. My name is Christina King, 29 years old. I married Michael, my classmate from vocational school, 8 years ago, at 21. We still don't have kids. Currently, I live with Michael, his parents, and my younger sister Marilyn, a high school student. That's 5 of us. The reason for this living arrangement goes back to when I entered vocational school. I've always loved baking. So, after high school, I enrolled in a pastry chef school. Michael, my husband, was a classmate. We got along very well and started dating soon. College life was so much fun. Just before graduation, my parents died in an accident. It was so sudden, I was engulfed in grief. But I couldn't just cry forever. I had my younger sister Marilyn. She was still in elementary school. I had a job lined up at a famous bakery, but thinking about living expenses and Marilyn's tuition weighed heavily on me. The insurance money from my parents' accident had been used up on medical expenses for my sick grandparents. Could I support Marilyn on my starting salary? When I was feeling anxious, Michael was the one who offered me a lifeline. Let's get married and move to the countryside together, with your sister too, he said. Michael was the heir to a traditional confectionery store. He planned to take over the family business after graduation. I intended to marry Christina sooner or later, it just happened sooner than planned. He assured me that once we were married, his family could help with Marilyn's tuition and living expenses. Of course, I had my doubts about accepting such an offer so easily. But Michael firmly said, Christina, you're practically family already, it's only natural to help each other out. His words were so comforting, I cried. I declined my job offer and became part of the Michaels family. Michael's family lived in the countryside. The traditional confectionery shop run by my in-laws, King, is a long-established business dating back 140 years. In the local community, it was a beloved shop known to everyone. My in-laws welcomed me and Marilyn warmly. I felt safe with them. They even promised to support Marilyn's education and living costs. I remember feeling very relieved. But looking back now, I can only think I was ignorant of the world. I had been thinking naively. I had no idea that marrying into this family would change my fate so dramatically. After marrying Michael, I worked at the confectionery daily. Mostly, I helped my mother-in-law with ordering supplies and managing expenses. Only my father-in-law and Michael actually made the confections. During busy times, some male part-timers from a confectionery school would come to help. It's not that I'm dissatisfied with my current job. But I graduated from a patisserie school. Yet, I haven't made a single confection. I want to work in the kitchen too. Even just to help with preparations. When I tell Michael this, he just says, well, maybe someday, avoiding a clear answer. I felt a bit frustrated, but I had no choice but to comply. As time went on, I got pregnant. 4 months in, we found out it was a boy. Michael and my in-laws were overjoyed. I was happy too. One day, when I was feeling uneasy, I started experiencing stomach pains from the morning. I had a bad feeling about it. I rushed to the nearby OBGYN. The doctor, who had been taking care of the King family, was recommended to me by my mother-in-law, and I had been visiting here. The elderly doctor began with, "I'm sorry to say." Then slowly, he announced, "You've had a miscarriage." My mind went blank. Stunned, I underwent the necessary procedures and returned home. Could there be anything more heartbreaking? When Michael asked, "How did it go?" I reported back to him through tears. That's when Michael's attitude changed. "What? You had a miscarriage? Why?" "I don't know. There can be many reasons for a miscarriage, they couldn't pinpoint one." "What? Isn't it because you weren't careful enough?" I was shocked by Michael's angry response. I thought. I was expecting comfort, but his reaction was unexpected. I couldn't believe what he said, and as I stood there dumbfounded. My mother-in-law also arrived upon hearing the commotion. "That's right, Christina. It's a shame, expected a boy, and you miscarried. You've let us down." "I didn't. Don't you know? You're supposed to bear a male heir for the King family. If you can't do that, you have no place here." My mother-in-law said this with a terrifying look and returned to her room. I never expected to be spoken to like this. The shock of the miscarriage and the harsh words left me stunned. It took me a long time to recover. Not a single word of sympathy from Michael or my mother-in-law. Instead, they hurled even more bitter words at me. "Geez, how long are you going to keep that gloomy face? Just forget about it already. If you have time to be down, start thinking about the next child. Make sure a safe delivery of a boy this time." My father-in-law was silent, but it was clear he agreed with them. Their looks towards me became harsher. After the miscarriage, I felt like I was walking on pins and needles in this house. It wasn't my fault I miscarried. The cause was unknown. I explained this over and over, but they insisted it was due to my poor health or behavior. I couldn't believe it. In this day and age, to think such people still exist. Sure, for self-employed families, having an heir might be important. But the King family's obsession was bizarre. I think the gender of the child shouldn't matter, but Michael and his parents were desperate for a boy. Scarily so. However, the real horror was yet to come. After that, I couldn't get pregnant for a while. Each time, Michael and his parents grew colder. "How many months has it been since then, and you're still not pregnant?" "I'm sorry." I was saddened by my mother-in-law's heartless words. She had been so kind at first, but now she had completely changed, a total 180. Michael was the same. He joined in belittling me. A boy or a girl, it should be a precious child. Michael always said, "Make sure you give birth to a boy." He said it was for the sake of the King family's legacy, but it's absurd in this day and age to insist that the heir has to be a boy. That's what I think, but under their cold stares, I often felt down. I have to have a boy. I researched infertility. It can be caused by men too, not just women. With that in mind, I suggested that Michael should also visit the OBGYN with me. But he opposed it fiercely. "Why should I go to an OBGYN? It's your fault we can't have kids." Michael and his parents seemed to think it was my fault. Disappointed, I fell back into a gloomy routine. The only time I felt at peace was when I was with Marilyn. With no parents, I'm practically a parent to her. After work, I'd listen to her school stories every day. Sometimes I'd help her with homework or play with her. Marilyn always looked up to me, calling me big sister. She came to a strange land with me, never complained, and tried her best to adapt. Marilyn was my emotional support. On the other hand, my in-laws' attitude remained the same. I had suggested infertility treatments like in vitro fertilization, but they just gave me suspicious looks. To get pregnant through such a mechanical method is unacceptable. It must be a natural pregnancy, no less. That's my mother-in-law's catchphrase. The family that runs the traditional shop, which had been passed down through generations for a long time, but the people of the King family had outdated ways of thinking. I sighed. It's too unfair to blame me alone for not having a child. I even consulted with the OBGYN. But the doctor, who's been with the King family for a long time, shared a similar view to my mother-in-law. We are strictly aiming for natural conception. We don't do in vitro fertilization, so you'll have to go to a city hospital for that. The city hospitals are too far to realistically go from here. I'm at a dead end. Unexpected stress started affecting my body. I began to experience irregular menstrual cycles, making it even harder to conceive. Then, one day it happened. I was about to go to sleep and looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. Michael must be coming home late again. A few times a week, he comes home late. Because of preparations for the next day. I was told to go to bed first, so I had already gone to my bedroom. That night, I went to bed early. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. I got up to drink some water. And passed by the living room. That's when I heard it. Michael and my mother-in-law's voices. They were back. I was about to say something, but I stopped in my tracks. What they were talking about was unimaginable. You're late. Can't help it, she wouldn't give it back. She kept asking when I'd leave my wife. I told her I'd think about it if she had a boy. Just a routine task for me to plant my seed in other women, but they take it seriously, annoying really. I had hopes when she got pregnant last time. A girl was a disappointment. Well, if it doesn't work out, we'll look for someone else. Yeah. The Kings need a boy, not a girl. And since she miscarried the boy, and hasn't been pregnant since. If she gives birth to a boy, you should leave Christina. Of course. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. It seemed from the conversation that Michael was cheating. And he was nonchalantly talking about his mistress being pregnant with a girl. I felt my legs shaking. Is this a dream? They both wanted a boy. To the extent of cheating, or rather, treating it like a task. I was so shocked, I had to leave the spot. They were secretly trying to have a child with another woman, behind my back. Both kept saying it was for the King family, but that's just an affair. Unbelievable. Do they want a boy that badly? That's when it hit me. The part-time workers dispatched from the confectionery school were always boys. There should be many women aspiring to be pastry chefs, yet they never hire women. I casually decided to ask. Why do they only accept men? Of course, I couldn't ask anyone from the King family directly. I decided to ask a boy who helps out at the shop. A student from the confectionery school who works the most during his long holidays. Hey, only boys come to help out here, right? Don't girls like this place? I asked nonchalantly, and the boy answered straightforwardly. Not at all. There are plenty of girls in my class who want to work at the Kings. But the job listings at school are for males only. Really? Didn't you know? Oh, right, Christina, you're not originally from here. This shop doesn't allow women in the kitchen. The Kings are quite traditional, believe in customs and all. The boy seemed to regret speaking too much and clammed up. But I pressed on. What customs? Tell me. He reluctantly shared. The Kings had always been succeeded by men. A few generations back, there was a time when no male heir was born, and a woman had to work in the kitchen. But for some unknown reason, the taste and popularity declined, and the Kings' business suffered. They ended up in massive debt. However, a miracle boy was born later and took over, turning the business around. Since then, there's been a superstition in the King family that if women make confectionaries, the business will fail. That's why women are no longer allowed in the kitchen. Even the part-time help positions were exclusively for men. The locals seemed to know about the King family's customs through word of mouth. So that was it. I finally understood. Michael never let me work in the kitchen. His parents' abnormal desire for a male heir. That's why they turned cold towards me after I miscarried the boy. And then that night's conversation. Desperately trying to have a boy with a woman who wasn't his wife. But isn't that an unethical act? Being unfaithful over some silly superstition. And it seemed like he planned to leave me if the mistress gave birth to a boy. What do they think of people? Treating women as mere tools for childbirth, I was trembling with anger. I wanted nothing more than to leave this house, to divorce. But there was Marilyn. Since I relied on the Kings for her tuition and living expenses, I couldn't divorce until she graduated high school. I had to endure until Marilyn's graduation. But just enduring wasn't enough. I began plotting my revenge against Michael and his parents. Time passed. Years went by, and I was now 29. I had a plan. For it, I needed to make the Kings as famous as possible. I started actively promoting the Kings on social media. Slowly, their popularity grew, and eventually, they became a nationally known store. Though an old establishment, the Kings had been only a local famous shop. Now, they were a household name, featured on TV and in magazines. Michael and my mother-in-law were happy with my work. They were still cold about not having a male child, but my success with social media and boosting the store's business had secured my place in the family. The plan was working. But I was hesitant to execute it. I owed the Kings one thing: they paid for Marilyn's tuition. But Marilyn was about to graduate. She was acquiring medical qualifications while in school. So, Marilyn had already secured a job as a medical office assistant at a small clinic. "I'm glad you got the job offer. But you chose a hospital quite far away, huh?" Marilyn answered with a somewhat somber expression. "Yeah. I wanted to be far away from here." "You mean?" "Sorry, sis. I'm grateful to the Kings for providing for my living expenses and high school tuition. But..." Marilyn hesitated. When I pressed her for more information, I learned something shocking. Apparently, Michael had tried to assault Marilyn. He said things like, "Christina can't have kids, so you have to fulfill the duty, or I'm paying for your tuition, so pay me back with your body." Thankfully, he was drunk at the time, and she managed to resist and avoid it, but the next day, he warned her, "Don't tell anyone about last night." I felt dizzy. Marilyn had kept quiet about it, considering my position. She had long known I was being blamed by them due to my infertility. "Finally, when I graduate high school, we can get away from the Kings. You don't have to stay here and suffer because of me. I'm sorry for making you endure all this." Marilyn spoke through tears. "No, I should apologize for putting you through this. If I had seen Michael's true nature earlier..." I apologized to Marilyn, crying. Unforgivable. A fierce flame of anger rose within me. It was one thing for them to involve me, but to involve Marilyn too. The Kings used the fact that they were paying for tuition and living expenses to torment us. I had been thankful and grateful when they said they would take care of Marilyn. But now, it felt like they had said it just to tie me to the Kings. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to divorce immediately. And I had to carry out my plan. That's when I decided. But then, something unexpected happened. I couldn't believe it and asked the doctor repeatedly. I was pregnant. Ever since I found out about Michael's infidelity, being intimate with him was a torment. But if I refused, he would verbally abuse me. I had no choice but to comply. And for 7 years, stress had caused me to have irregular menstrual cycles. I thought I couldn't have children, but the irony was that the moment I decided to divorce, I got pregnant. But my decision remained unchanged. I resolved to announce my pregnancy. Michael was surprised, then delighted. He suddenly started praising me. "Wow, pregnant. That's great. What's the gender? Tell me quickly." "It's too early to know, it's still the beginning." "That's right,
We can't be sure yet. It has to be a boy.
It seemed my mother-in-law had been listening to the conversation.
That's right. Let me know as soon as you find out.
They were as selfish as ever. Without changing my expression, I said calmly, I want a divorce.
What?
Michael and my mother-in-law were shocked. I glared at them and let it all out.
I know Michael has been cheating for years. No matter how desperate you are to have a boy, it's not excusable. Stop making a fool of me. I have solid proof of your infidelity.
After that, I followed Michael when he came home late. He was indeed visiting another woman's house. She seemed to be a high school classmate of Michael's, who had always admired the prestigious King family. It must have been easy for Michael to seduce such a woman. I captured several photos of them together, looking intimate. When I showed the evidence, Michael was taken aback. But he quickly retorted. What are you talking about? This isn't cheating. It's all because you couldn't give birth to a boy. I had no choice but to find another woman to preserve the Kings.
Really? And assaulting Marilyn was also unavoidable?
Well, that. Michael was at a loss for words. He must have felt guilty. But then my mother-in-law sighed. Her following words were horrifying. Oh, what do you think we took your sister for? If you couldn't do it, we expected Marilyn to fulfill the duty. Anyone will do, as long as they can give birth to a boy. Being able to bear a male child is the only condition to stay in the King family. You worked hard on the social media promotion for us, maybe out of guilt for not having a child. Well, the store became famous because of it, and we appreciate that. But if you can't have a boy, you have no right to be here. Understand? Do these people have no human heart? They saw Marilyn as just a backup plan for me. All they care about is preserving the Kings.
I don't understand at all. Is the family so important that you'll hurt our hearts for it? Unbelievable. I can't stay in this absurd, nonsensical family any longer.
When I shouted, my mother-in-law made a bitter face. On the contrary, Michael snorted. People outside the King family will never understand, Christina. That's all you were. If you want to divorce that much, fine. But he said if it's a boy, he wants the child. He doesn't need a girl. How can he speak about his own child like this? I never thought they could be so cold. They seemed like a family crazed with superstitions. I had no choice but to agree to these terms. In return, if the child is a girl, they have to promise never to involve themselves with me again. And so, I was finally able to divorce Michael. On the day I left the King family, I was packing my things. Marilyn had already moved to an apartment rented by her employer. It was too dangerous to stay in the King household any longer. While I was packing, Michael appeared. Hey, isn't it time to find out the baby's gender? Go to the hospital quickly. Even at this time, he's worried about that. I despised him. But I wouldn't have to come here anymore. As a final goodbye, I went to the usual OBGYN. The elderly doctor quickly diagnosed, it's a girl. Their faces, when I told them, were as if to say, see, I knew it. They seemed to have completely lost interest in me. But I didn't care anymore. What these people think doesn't matter. I just wanted to leave the house as soon as possible. This long but short marriage was over. I felt relieved as if a burden had been lifted. But there was still one last thing to do. I updated the King's social media account. And then I left the King house. Afterward, I stayed with Marilyn for a while. Just to be safe, I had informed her workplace that I would be living with her. The clinic director, knowing our situation of having no parents, readily agreed to let me stay. I was grateful for that. Then one day, my phone vibrated intensely several times. It was an angry call from Michael.
Hey, Christina. What have you done?
I knew the reason for his anger. The last post I updated detailed all the wrongdoings of the Kings. Their detestable customs and Michael's cheating habits. It spread everywhere, appearing in all sorts of media. As the Kings had become a famous store, they were featured prominently on TV news and the internet. They were being bashed relentlessly. If it had been just a small countryside confectionery, it wouldn't have blown up this big. I had ostensibly worked on social media to make the Kings more prosperous and famous. But my true intention was different. If you're to drop someone down from a mountain to the valley, it's better to make the fall from the highest, all at once. That's why I raised the Kings' fame. I successfully marketed them into a fame unusual for a countryside confectionery. When the time was ripe, I dropped the bomb. I thought we agreed you wouldn't involve yourself with me anymore. I retorted calmly. Yeah, but...
Stop being deluded by silly superstitions and treating people like fools with your outdated thinking. You're scum. Get bashed by the public and reflect on your ridiculous actions,
I said forcefully and hung up the phone. Shortly after, I went into labor. Fortunately, the clinic where Marilyn worked was an OB/GYN, so I had been attending there. And when I gave birth, it turned out to be a boy. The diagnosis of the country doctor was wrong. Apparently, it's possible to mistake a girl for a boy due to the position of the umbilical cord. But the doctor chuckled. Normally, it's clear enough not to make such a mistake. That doctor was the longtime physician for the King family. Perhaps after years of accommodating the Kings, his skills had dulled? I thought so, feeling fortunate amidst the misfortune. Anyway, if the Kings knew this child was a boy, they would do anything to take him back. I decided to keep silent. The baby's name is Ray. I chose a gender-neutral name for Ray, just in case the Kings ever found out. Ray grew up blissfully unaware of the adults' issues. Meanwhile, the scandal of the Kings didn't die down. Their thoroughly outdated custom of excluding women. Michael's numerous affairs, all excused by succession. These became perfect fodder for a scandal-hungry public. The rumors about the Kings were wildly and fiercely spread. Their reputation affected their business significantly. Their regular corporate customers from hotels and inns started canceling one after another. And the number of walk-in customers decreased. Gradually, their business went into debt. And eventually went bankrupt. Michael and his parents now apparently live in a small apartment. To cover the debts, they had to sell their house and store. Shocked by their downfall, Michael's parents fell ill. Michael now spends his days caring for them. And of course, being looked down upon by the locals, but also the relentless bashing on social media by strangers. Their names, photos, and even their address were exposed online. They've had endless troubles like graffiti on their house and stones thrown at them. To me, it was all their own doing. A family that believed in outdated superstitions and dehumanized people. No matter how famous their confectionery was, who would want to eat it knowing the people behind it lacked any compassion? Watching Ray play with his toys, I thought about it. Here was the boy the Kings had so desperately wanted. It's ironic that they went bankrupt after a boy was finally born. Captured by their own agenda, they lost sight of what it means to be human. Ray looked at me curiously. I decided to stop thinking about them. My revenge was over. It was time to use my time for myself. I made up my mind to pursue something I had been envisioning. As time passed, Ray entered elementary school. At the same time, I decided to rent an apartment. I couldn't keep staying in Marilyn's workplace apartment forever. Besides, I had received a substantial amount of money. I had become a pastry chef, making my own cakes. I rented a small shop to sell them. At first, they didn't sell much, but gradually they became popular through word of mouth. From there, corporate customers like nearby hotels started increasing, and my business got on track. That's why I was able to plan for renting an apartment to live with Ray. I was so happy to be working as a pastry chef again. After all, I hadn't made sweets for a while since marrying into the Kings. But when I made sweets again and saw Ray's smile, my old passion was rekindled. I wanted to make my own sweets again. To see the smiles of people eating them. That was my original starting point. I remembered that. Imagining the smiles of those who eat my creations. That gives me more strength than anything. I may not become as famous as the kings, but that's okay. If I put my heart and soul into it, those who eat it, and everyone around them, will surely smile. Ray and Marilyn enjoy the sweets I make with delight. Just that alone makes my heart feel fulfilled.
Despite everything, I am very happy now. I can say that from the bottom of my heart, and I can't help but smile.
Women have it easy.
Just claim menopause and you can skip work and chores.
My husband's words boiled my blood. I couldn't hide my fury at what he said. The changes in my body started after I turned 50. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with menopause. These 2 years, I've suffered from dizziness, palpitations, hot flashes, and various other symptoms. Even though I'm receiving treatment at the hospital, it's only providing symptom relief and not leading to a complete cure. All this time, my husband, living under the same roof, showed no understanding of my illness. Dizziness? Tiredness? Back pain?
That happens to everyone as they age. But to label it menopause and skip work to lie in bed all day?
Lucky you. As I lay unable to stand due to dizziness, these were his words. He maliciously interpreted my doctor-advised leave as skiving off for a trivial illness. He repeatedly hurled insults and sarcasm at my incurable condition. But this day was different. He looked down on me with a disdainful laugh.
If you have time to show off your illness, at least do some housework, like a wife should.
I'm Linda, 52 years old. I live with my husband, David, 3 years my senior. We met through a mutual acquaintance in our late 20s and hit it off immediately. We smoothly continued our relationship and married in our early 30s. Though we occasionally had minor quarrels, David was kind. We both worked hard and lived a peaceful life. We don't have kids, but have supported each other well as a couple. However, a few years ago, our marriage underwent significant changes. I was working full-time but am currently on leave. Due to ill health. Specifically, I started experiencing menopause symptoms in my late 40s, leading to frequent health issues. Initially, it was irregular menstrual cycles and sudden hot flashes, but the symptoms worsened over time, including severe palpitations and sleepless nights. Eventually, it even affected my mental health, causing irritability and depression. Menopause brings about various symptoms over approximately 10 years around the time of menstruation stopping. I had heard about it, but experiencing it myself was far more challenging than I imagined. My symptoms were severe, and on family advice, I started hospital treatment, but there's no cure. The doctor said menopause involves diverse symptoms, so treatment is usually symptomatic. I'm using prescribed medicine and herbal remedies, but they only temporarily alleviate symptoms. It became hard to continue working, so I took leave when I turned 50, 2 years ago. My company allows up to 3 years of leave, and soon I'll have to decide whether to return or resign. I don't want to quit, but there's no sign of my symptoms easing, so resignation looms as a frustrating reality. If I quit, I dread what David might say. Initially, David was concerned and attentive when I fell ill with menopause. He wasn't one to take the lead in household chores, but he used to care when I was unwell. I thought he was kind, but as my health issues dragged on, he started to look at me with annoyance. When I discussed taking a temporary leave from work, he didn't take it well.
I don't quite get what's up with your health, but do you really need to take leave? You're not just planning to slack off at home, right?
He said, which shocked me. Men also experience menopause, but David, despite his chronic condition, has rarely been unwell. He's always maintained good health, so he seems to view my prolonged unwellness as laziness. No matter how much I explain my symptoms, he never shows understanding, always saying, "What's the solution then? If one method doesn't work, find another. Why keep saying you can't heal? Find a way to get better." Continuing to work in my current state is tough. When I expressed my desire to take a leave of absence until my health stabilizes, David, as expected, got furious. However, when I told him that not only my boss, but also my colleagues and juniors, urged me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, albeit with dissatisfaction. I had resolved to work harder on household chores while I was off work, but there were times when I suddenly felt unwell and couldn't even get up. Standing up made me dizzy, and even sitting down, I couldn't stop sweating, possibly due to hot flashes. Still, when I tried to force myself to vacuum, I was mercilessly struck by severe back pain. I ended up taking medication and enduring the pain, only doing household chores when I felt a bit better. But David still didn't understand.
Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the doctor?
As expected, he gradually started treating me coldly. You know, don't be so dependent all the time. If you're on leave and staying at home all day, why don't you at least finish all the household chores during the day? You can't be feeling sick from morning till night. Coming home to no greeting, dinner that's just cut and cooked, what are you doing at home? David complained more than once when he returned from work. His exasperated size and attitude were shocking to me. Over the weekend, when I was feeling ill and lying down, he yelled, "How long are you going to sleep? At least do the laundry." David's sarcasm and complaints increased day by day, and there was no more consideration or concern from him. While his terrible attitude hurt me, I also grew increasingly anxious, wondering when my symptoms would heal or if they ever would. However, it was truly a blessing that my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Emily, who live in the same town, showed understanding of my condition and occasionally offered advice. Barbara is over 80 years old but has strong legs and is a very lively person who speaks her mind. My father-in-law has already passed away, and she lives with Emily and her husband. It was Barbara and Emily who first suggested I go to the hospital and even said I should consider taking a leave of absence if my condition was too severe. I'm really grateful to them, as both my parents have already passed away, for being so caring about my menopause symptoms. One day, David told me, for Mom's birthday, we're gonna have a dinner party at our place next weekend. In David's family, it's been a tradition since his childhood to have big dinner parties for family birthdays. Since marrying him, I've participated every year. Depending on the year, we've either gone out for meals or had a party at his parents' house, but this year, we decided to have Barbara's birthday celebration at our house. Naturally, I was in charge of the cooking. Barbara and Emily were supposed to come over in the evening, and Emily's husband couldn't make it due to work. "Make sure you're in good shape for the day," David said, glaring at me sharply.
I won't tolerate it if it's like last year.
"I understand," I replied, as I could only nod in front of David's assertive attitude. The thing is, last year, I felt ill during Barbara's birthday and missed the party at my in-laws. David seemed to think he was embarrassed by this. I still vividly remember being harshly scolded by him when he returned home, which was really tough and made me cry. So this time, I want to make sure I'm in good health for the dinner party, just as David said. However, if it were a condition that could be fixed just by wanting it, I wouldn't have been suffering for years. Hoping for even a slightly better condition, I started preparing little by little. Barbara is going to be 85 on her next birthday. Wanting to show my gratitude for all she has done for me, I vowed to put my best effort into cooking dinner for everyone that day. Since we're hosting the in-laws, there's a lot to do before the day, besides meal preparation. David is somewhat prideful, so I knew he wouldn't be satisfied unless the house was cleaned from corner to corner. I took a few days to thoroughly clean the house, all the while consulting my health. David never helps with the housework, just relaxing in the living room, but I've gotten used to that. I know some younger men nowadays do housework, but in David's generation, it's considered the wife's job. I never expected him to help, since he thinks I just loaf around the house all day. The day before the party, I finished shopping for the dinner menu and went to bed early, praying that I would wake up with mild symptoms. However, on the day of the dinner party, I woke up with terrible headaches and dizziness. When I tried to get up from bed, my vision became all wobbly, and I had to close my eyes. Then, I heard the intense pounding of my heart and was struck with a headache so severe it felt like my head was being hammered. It was one of the worst symptoms I've experienced recently. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to get out of bed, only to be greeted by David's loud TSK from above. Realizing I was unable to prepare breakfast, he grabbed only his wallet and phone, and headed towards the door. He said indifferently, "I'm gonna grab some food. Then, because I feel sick being around you, I'll head over to Mom's place early. Make sure you have dinner ready and greet them properly," and he left the house. Indeed, David was supposed to pick up Barbara and Emily today, but showing up so early in the morning must have been inconvenient for them. His thoughtless words hurt, but I couldn't afford to stay upset. I just drank some jelly drink and took my medicine, lying in the living room until my symptoms settled. But even in the afternoon, my condition hardly improved. The medicine eased the headache, but I felt dizzy and unsteady whenever I tried to get up. I needed to start preparing dinner soon, but I couldn't get my body to move as I wanted. I stood in the kitchen for short periods, taking breaks in between, but time was running out. Feeling desperate, I tried calling David but couldn't reach him. I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. Eventually, it was 5 p.m., still not fully ready, and David returned home with Barbara and Emily. David entered the living room and looked at me sitting on the kitchen floor with a puzzled expression. "You didn't even greet Mom and the others when they arrived. Is dinner ready?" "It's not even set up," he said, and I was at a loss for words. I had made a salad with torn leafy vegetables and tomatoes. But beyond that, I had hardly prepared anything else. Anticipating another scolding, my heart raced with anxiety, and I struggled to breathe, but I decided to apologize and explain the truth. "David, I'm sorry. This is all I could manage. I'm really sorry, but could you order something tasty for the main dish?" "I'm sorry," I said. David's face turned red, and his demeanor changed drastically.
"Don't play the sick card now. This is an important dinner, and Mom was really looking forward to it. And you're just trying to embarrass me again like last year?"
David was furiously angry, scolding me harshly. "It's not like that. I'm not trying to play the sick card."
"You are. It's pathetic that at your age, you can't even manage your own health. You're inconveniencing us all because of your issues."
David didn't listen to me and continued to berate me.
"Then why didn't you answer the phone? I sent a message saying to eat out. I even sent another email 3 minutes ago asking you to order something. Why are you so insistent on eating at home when you do nothing?"
I exploded with pent-up frustration, shouting back loudly. Each word felt like a blow to the head with a metal bat. My vision was so blurred I could hardly see David's face properly. I couldn't hear anything over my own voice and pounding heart, and I was sweating profusely from the heat. The symptoms I had been managing with medication were now coming on strong, and I regretted it a bit, but I couldn't keep silent with David. When my vision finally cleared a bit and I caught sight of David, he was standing there with his mouth agape in a foolish expression. Then our eyes met, and he glared at me, pointing his finger strongly. "What's with that tone of voice? Pretending to be sick and hiding in the house, not doing any housework, you lazy." And then snapping back when pointed out, "You're the worst. Such a wife is unfit, I'm sick of supporting you. If you can't do the housework, then let's get a divorce," he yelled loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Despite my desperate pleas, nothing seemed to affect David. After years together, the fact that David could suggest divorce without hesitation made me feel so miserable that I was on the verge of tears. I had no choice but to agree to the divorce. Just as I was about to speak my agreement, I heard light footsteps. But David, in his rage, didn't seem to notice.
"What's the big deal about menopause anyway? Being tired, having stiff shoulders, that's normal for our age. Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad if you're taking medicine. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you?"
Then someone tapped David on the shoulder from behind. It was Emily. With an anger I had never seen before, Emily swung her right hand as David turned around, striking him hard across the cheek. David, hit by a powerful right straight from a 60-year-old woman, fell to the floor, looking up at Emily, bewildered, not understanding what had happened.
Hey, sis. Why did you hit me all of a sudden?
As he rubbed his cheek, puzzled, Emily glared at him sharply. And you, what's with that attitude? Have you been treating Linda like this for years? Deciding the severity of her illness without being a doctor and berating your wife, you should be ashamed, she yelled furiously. David, always trying to look good in front of his family, had never treated me so coldly. Even when he was berating me with disdain as I suffered from dizziness, he became caring about my health and made coffee himself as soon as Emily visited. I had confided in Barbara and Emily about my illness, but never about David's behavior. I was worried that speaking ill of David, their blood relative, might make them resent me. They might not believe me, as they hadn't seen how he treated me. Even if they did believe and sympathize, I feared how David would retaliate after they confronted him. But now, seeing Emily's actions, I wondered if my thinking had been wrong.
What do you mean? It's Mom's birthday party today, and I wanted her to enjoy it. But she ruined the dinner by not cooking, isn't she to blame?
David stood up and pointed at me, blaming me further. Then Barbara, who had come into the living room with Emily, glared at David.
Are you saying Linda ruined the dinner? That's just your opinion, isn't it? From what I've heard, Linda did as much as she could despite being in pain. When she realized she couldn't finish in time, she contacted you to change the location or order something. I don't want to be celebrated by someone who's unwell. And I'm certainly not happy to be celebrated by a son who only complains after pushing everything onto his sick wife.
Barbara spoke firmly to David. Then Emily asked, did you just leave Linda alone when you knew she was unwell and come to our house?
Well, what could I have done? There are many things you could have done, like helping with housework or being considerate of her condition. Didn't I tell you to be more caring toward Linda when she first started feeling unwell? You just found it bothersome, didn't you?
David was at a loss for words, cornered by Emily's sharp comments. It seemed Emily had told David to be more attentive to me after I started feeling unwell, but David's behavior made it clear he hadn't heeded her words. Why do you and Mom always take her side? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Being tired or having palpitations, that happens to everyone as they age. Women who just want to be lazy call it an illness and make themselves out to be patients, David continued to justify himself. Emily sighed and began to explain.
You might not know this, David, but I also suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It's only recently that they've settled down, but they were so bad that I quit my job 10 years ago. You're saying that a disease that forced me to quit my job isn't real?
Hearing Emily's words, David froze, looking stunned. I had talked to Emily soon after my menopause symptoms started. She told me that she had suffered from menopause at the same age as me and had to temporarily stop working before eventually resigning. She didn't want to quit her job, but there was no sign of recovery, so after consulting with her family, she decided to prioritize her health. I knew Emily had quit her job around the age of 50, but I didn't know the reason until she told me. Thinking back, I realized that I hadn't seen her around that time. We mainly communicated by email because she couldn't meet due to her poor health.
It was really tough back then. I thought it might never get better. But Michael, my husband, told me to quit my job and take it easy, Emily said.
Michael, Emily's husband, is 5 years younger than her. His work involves irregular hours and night shifts, so he couldn't attend the dinner. I don't see him often, but I remember him as a kind man who always asks about my health. Emily, having such a compassionate husband, desperately appealed to David.
Linda isn't your servant, you know. Shouldn't a husband be more caring towards his wife?
I'm sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell back then, but I didn't realize it was for that reason.
David replied, sounding defensive. But Emily's expression remained stern.
Right now, it's not me you should be apologizing to, but Linda.
Emily stated firmly. David, looking frustrated, turned his face towards me. David loves Emily, so he generally can't go against her words. Eventually, he seemed to give in. I'm sorry. Being scolded by my sister has been a wake-up call. From now on, I'll help Linda and let's get along well, he said, looking into my eyes with a sincere tone. I thought he finally understood and felt relieved, thinking of forgiving him, when I heard, wait a moment. It was Barbara who intervened. Tired from standing, she approached the sofa with Emily's support and sat down next to me. Then, locking eyes with me, she said sternly, Linda, don't take David's words seriously. You should get a divorce quickly. What? What do you mean? I asked, surprised. Barbara began to share a past experience.
Actually, I suffered from similar symptoms at your age. There was no name for it like menopause back then. From what you've told me, I think I also had menopause. I've mentioned this before, haven't I?
I nodded slightly at Barbara's words. When Barbara was about my age, menopause wasn't widely recognized. And there were no treatments, let alone understanding from others. Barbara chuckled with a troubled smile and pointed at David.
David used to say terrible things to me when I was suffering back then. It was around the time before he married you, I believe. He was still living at home, and he would say things like hurry up and make dinner, how long will you sleep, you're the mother, stop pretending to be sick, and such unkind words.
Barbara's face looked pained, as if recalling those difficult times.
Is that true?
I asked David, wanting to believe in him. He awkwardly turned his face away without denying anything, indicating that what Barbara said was true. Barbara looked down painfully and said, my late husband, David's father, got angry at David's behavior back then and hit him. When he was severely scolded by his father, David said the exact same thing, that he had a wake-up call. Indeed, after that, David stopped saying anything to me. That's because he soon married you and moved out. But Linda, he treated you badly, didn't he? So, David hasn't changed at all. Even after decades, he has no understanding of someone else's illness. She spoke calmly, dismissing David's words as mere excuses.
No way! Just wait a minute, I won't do it anymore, believe me.
David tried to intervene, but Emily grabbed his arm to stop him.
I saw it back then too. That's why I hit you like Dad did. Remember, after Dad scolded you, you were crying and apologized to Mom, saying you wouldn't do it again, that you had a wake-up call, and that it was your fault. But now, you're doing the same thing to Linda that you did to Mom. Asking to be believed after doing the same thing twice is just too convenient. There's no way we can believe you.
Emily admonished, and David bit his lip in frustration. As he fell silent, Barbara grabbed my shoulders and said, that's why you need to divorce David and escape quickly. Otherwise, you'll continue to suffer. Now, with my daughter and me here, is your chance. If it's just the two of you, he'll never admit his faults. He might even get angry at you for embarrassing him in front of his parents. I felt sad to hear such words from his own mother. The thought of divorcing at this age was daunting, but hearing Barbara's story made me feel like I couldn't go on with David. I had endured his treatment, believing that once my symptoms eased, we could return to living happily as before. But it would likely just be a brief respite before things got worse again. I also felt rising anger at learning David had verbally abused Barbara in the past. Suppressing my ongoing dizziness, I stood up and, looking straight at David, expressed my intention to divorce. David shook off Emily's hand and shouted, "What, so everyone's against me now?" Everyone in the room looked at David with cold eyes. Faced with such gazes even from his family, David turned red with rage. "Fine, I get it. If that's what you all say, then I'll agree to the divorce," he said, angrily consenting to the divorce. The dinner party was cancelled, and Barbara and Emily went home. David stayed at a hotel. Our divorce proceeded without any dispute over property division and was finalized smoothly. Afterward, I focused on recuperating from my condition, living alone after separating from David. About half a year later, I received a call from David, whom I hadn't been in contact with at all. Since leaving him, I had moved into an apartment and was living alone, regularly visiting the hospital for my treatment. As expected, the call was filled with David's selfish demands. I had been feeling better recently without any stress, but the call from David gave me a bad feeling. He had a pre-existing condition that, according to him, worsened after our divorce and him living alone. Yet, David always boasted about perfectly managing his own health. He even used that to insult me when I was unwell, calling me lazy for not getting better sooner.
Why did it get like this? You said you could manage your health perfectly, right?
I retorted, although I knew the reason. David's idea of managing his health was shallow, just choosing what to eat from the meals I prepared, considering balance. He never had to cook from scratch because I always planned the meals with his health in mind. Moreover, since he never did any household chores, his living standards plummeted over the past 6 months. His diet consisted of convenience store meals and retorts, only showering, not cleaning, which inevitably led to his deteriorating health. I won't be able to live like this. That's why I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year, your illness must be cured by now, he said without any remorse. Apparently, he first turned to Emily and Barbara, but Emily was busy caring for Barbara and couldn't help. Reluctantly contacting me as a last resort, David pleaded. Though I wanted to refuse, he was, after all, my husband for many years. I thought of ignoring him, but David said, "Then at least come and look at the album I found in the closet. If you don't want it, I'll throw it away." I hesitated, thinking it might be old photos, including good times with David and Barbara's family. Despite being disillusioned now, our relationship was good back then, and there were photos with Barbara and Emily. I decided to go and pick out my part of the photos from our former home. The house we lived in until half a year ago was dirtier than before, possibly due to neglect. Empty convenience store meal containers were left on the table, making me frown involuntarily. "Without you, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move when I'm feeling unwell," David excused himself without being asked. He looked unexpectedly well, despite claiming to be unwell. Moreover, despite seeking care in anticipation of worsening health, what David really wanted was cleaning, laundry, and meal preparation. It seemed like he just wanted a housekeeper. After some hesitation, I replied, "You don't look injured and seem perfectly fine. Why don't you stop slacking off and take care of yourself?" At this, David narrowed his eyes displeasedly and retorted, "You know my illness affects my internal organs and nerves, right? Don't judge just by appearances. I'm really suffering, and you dare accuse me of slacking off." He spat those words out. I just stared at him coldly in response, and he started to stutter. Suddenly, David stopped. And, taking a deep breath,
"I was wrong to say that to you when you were suffering. I'm truly sorry and have reflected deeply. I won't do it again, so please."
Before he could finish, I firmly declined.
"Sorry, but I can't take care of you. I'm still dealing with menopause myself, and I can't trust your repentance."
Then, a desperate David clung to me, seemingly without any concern for how he appeared.
"Please, I could be hospitalized at any time due to my worsening condition. Medication alone isn't enough, proper diet management is essential, and I'm in trouble without you. Please, I'm begging you."
While David seemed genuinely remorseful, I remembered what Barbara and Emily had told me about his past actions.
"They say he only apologizes deeply when he wants to blame you for not forgiving him."
Recalling her words, I shook my head slowly. I was already overwhelmed with my own issues and not in a position to take care of someone else. If I went back to living with and caring for David, the stress would likely exacerbate my menopause symptoms again. I couldn't go back to square one after finally starting to feel better. It's impossible.
"If you really need care, use a caregiving or helper service,"
I told him, explaining these options. I made it clear again that I couldn't provide care and had no intention of living together in the future, then returned to my life. Later, as my symptoms settled, I resumed work after a long leave of absence. I started returning to work gradually. There was a time when I contemplated resigning, but now that I need to live on my own, I have to earn my living expenses independently. Additionally, having always found fulfillment in my job, despite the break of 2 years and a few months, I found it enjoyable once I started working again. I had no intention of reconciling with David or remarrying anyone else at the moment. However, I still kept in touch with David's family, occasionally meeting them for meals. I heard that the traditional family dinners, a long-standing custom in David's family, were discontinued after this incident. Furthermore, David apparently quit his job for reasons unknown. He claimed it was to focus on his treatment, but his visit frequency to the doctor and dietary habits hadn't changed. He had some savings from early retirement, so he seemed financially stable for the time being. Nevertheless, he appeared to be living in fear of an uncertain future due to his illness. As for me, I plan to continue cherishing my health and living a fulfilling life for the rest of my days.
Please, take care of these two for me,
he begged. I couldn't help but feel utterly exasperated with him. The nerve of him to ask me to even take care of his mistress was just outrageous.
What? Why don't you ask your parents? What are you saying? Should I make my elderly parents take on such a burden? You're heartless.
Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be delighted to help, wouldn't she?
And what position are you in to be saying such things?
Mark, my husband, despite being in a position to ask for help, never lost his arrogant attitude. Watching him, I couldn't help but wonder what I ever saw in him. Excuse me, coming through. Just then, a new bed was brought in next to us. I glanced over, recognized who it was, and couldn't help but scream.
What? Ivy?
The woman in the bed was someone I knew very well.
I never imagined you were Mark's mistress,
I said glaringly, and she looked away. Now, what am I supposed to do with them?
We're family, so help us out, will you?
While watching the two of them cling to me, begging for help, I found myself deep in thought. My name is Hazel Smith. I'm a 35-year-old housewife raising a lovely 10-year-old son, Sebastian. I have a younger sister, Ivy, who is 6 years younger, and frankly, we've never gotten along. Ivy was irresponsible and ran off with a man as soon as she graduated high school.
I'm sorry, Hazel. I know I shouldn't be causing you stress right now.
My parents lamented over Ivy's choices and made sure it didn't bring mental unstableness on me. They didn't want to worry me as I was pregnant at the time. However, they had no choice but to inform me after Ivy ran off with all the family's savings. That news did indeed cause me great mental distress.
Are you okay, Hazel? You need to prioritize your baby now.
Mark had supported me during that time. He suggested I go back to my parents' place for the birth, which turned out to be a great help. It allowed me to support my parents financially with my savings and safely deliver Sebastian. By the way, I've since been repaid by my parents for that money.
Thank you, Mark. Your suggestion really helped me feel at ease. Don't mention it. I asked you to quit your job for me, so it's the least I could do.
Mark and I used to work at the same company. Mark had been my mentor at work. I admired how diligently he taught me, and his confession led to us dating. When I became pregnant with Sebastian, we decided to marry. He said, "I want my wife to be at home. If you don't mind, would you quit your job?" So, I decided to leave my job for marriage. Despite some regret about leaving work, it allowed me to support my family, which in hindsight, was a good thing. And it was good that Sebastian's birth brightened our home, which had been shadowed by Ivy's actions.
Hey, Mom. Need any help with anything? Could you clean the bathtub? Sure, leave it to me.
Sebastian, now a big boy, is still so sweet and adorable. He plays energetically every day, does his homework when I ask. Sebastian's current obsession with helping around the house often had him asking if there was anything he could do. His excitement and willingness to help always bring a smile to my face.
All done. Thank you. Here's your allowance for helping out. Yay!
He was thrilled, though I wondered if his eagerness to help was partly for the allowance. Regardless, living together as a family like this made me genuinely happy. One day, while I was busy with housework, Mark's mother called. "You haven't visited in a while. Come over this weekend and bring Sebastian. I'll prepare a feast."
I'm sorry, we already have plans for this weekend.
Really? Is it something that can't be rescheduled to another weekend? "I'll talk it over with Mark," I said, trying to dodge a direct answer. It hadn't even been a month since our last visit.
I know she's not a bad person.
I thought to myself. My in-laws are nice people, and I've never felt mistreated by them. However, Mark's mother adores her only son and her grandson, Sebastian. This made his parents eager to have us at his parents' house. It wasn't that I disliked going there. As a daughter-in-law, I wasn't overworked or mistreated. They treated me more like a guest, not even letting me help in the kitchen. However, being at the in-laws always required being on my toes.
Sebastian takes after me, he's really bright. Good thing he doesn't take after Hazel in that regard. She was always slow at work, probably struggled with her studies too.
Moreover, whenever we visited Mark's parents' house, Mark would start drinking from the daytime. He would then talk to his father in a way that belittled me.
"Hazel, you need to try a bit harder."
His father would hear this and, without listening to my side, would chime in. Their remarks always made me uncomfortable. There was another issue I had.
"Grandma wants us to visit this weekend.
What do you think, Sebastian?"
"If it's Dad's mom, I don't really want to go."
The issue was Sebastian's reluctance to visit. At 10 years old, he finds his grandparents' house boring. Their neighborhood is quiet with no parks or natural areas to play in. The backyard could have been a play area, but it's full of my father-in-law's flowers, making it difficult to run around. So, Sebastian brings his homework and PC games, but
"You don't need to do homework, Sebastian, you're smart enough. We don't understand these games and no fun, let's talk instead."
They'd take away his entertainment. And my protests were met with a dismissive sure, from them, and Mark told me, it's okay once in a while. It's understandable, considering how uninteresting those visits were to him.
"I'd rather go out with you and Dad than visit Grandma's."
Sebastian would sometimes suggest to Mark, but he would dismiss it, saying, visiting my family is our outing. Even when I try to advocate for Sebastian's wishes, Mark insists, catering to every whim isn't good for his upbringing. Mark claims this, but he's hardly been involved in Sebastian's upbringing. When Sebastian was a baby, Mark used my stay at my parents' house as an excuse to visit only occasionally. He left all the diaper changes and baths to me and my parents. He probably held our child only a handful of times. When I wanted to return home, Mark would insist, it's better for you to stay at your parents' for now. At the time, I thought he was being considerate, but now I see it as his reluctance to participate in parenting. Perhaps his eagerness to take Sebastian to his parents' house stems from not wanting to deal with him himself.
"Dad's just not interested in me,"
Sebastian said, echoing the sentiment about Mark. Hearing this, I couldn't help but feel troubled. This week, I had planned to take Sebastian to my parents' house. Therefore, I decided to talk to Mark when he returned home, hoping to somehow convince him to decline the visits.
"My parents' house should be the priority. But we went there almost every weekend last month, and it's only been a couple of weeks since. We haven't been to my parents' house in nearly a year, even though Sebastian spent time there as a baby."
Mark's parents often insist on our visits because they didn't get to see Sebastian much when he was a baby. We couldn't see him much then, so now we want him here, they would say. To be clear, it's not like they never saw him as a baby. They even stayed at my parents' house for about a week. The in-laws had always been merely guests in our lives. Moreover, my parents saw Sebastian only a couple of times a year since we moved back to our place.
"Your parents' house is just boring for me."
Enough.
"We've had this visit planned for 6 months. If you prefer your parents' house so much, why don't you go alone?"
"Fine, I will," he replied easily. I wonder if he really cared about our family. I tried to shake off such thoughts, but they lingered. I started working from home to prepare for situations like this. It wasn't much, but it kept me from overthinking. And it helped me save a little.
If I want Mark to be more supportive, I need to try too.
I thought, trying to be objective. But my efforts seemed futile. Hi Dad, Mom, long time no see. Long time no see.
Wow, look how much you've grown, Sebastian.
Following our plans, I took Sebastian with me to visit my parents' home. Sebastian was delighted, and so were my parents.
I practiced the game you like, Sebastian. Want to play together? Really? I'd love to. Oh, but I need to do my homework first. How responsible of you. Use the living room, dear. We'll prepare dinner while you finish your homework.
They said, prioritizing Sebastian's needs. The contrast with Mark's parents made me feel uneasy.
What's wrong? You seem troubled.
My mother noticed and said. I took the opportunity to talk to her about everything while Sebastian was with my father.
Indeed, we did monopolize your time with the baby, but that was only for about 2 months after he was born, right? Besides, it's wrong to ignore Sebastian's preferences and opinions. Honestly, I'm worried that continuing this marriage might not be best for Sebastian. I understand. Talk it through with Mark, and remember, you can always come back home. We're here for you.
I was grateful for her understanding. I knew my father would say the same. That was what I was thinking at the time. I'm home. I heard a voice. And as my mother and I exchanged surprised looks, a woman with a little girl entered.
Ivy, is that you? Hey sis, why are you here?
It was Ivy, my sister, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years. The little girl, about Sebastian's age, was hiding behind her.
Ivy?
Why are you here, Ivy?
Our parents were visibly shocked by her sudden return. Ivy, while casually placing her bags down, said, I'm tired. Just put these in a room for me, will you? Sebastian, sensing the odd atmosphere, hurried over to me.
Ivy, what have you been doing all this time?
Well, I got married to the guy I eloped. To summarize her story, she got married to the guy she eloped with and had Hannah. And then she had been living as a family of 3 but returned as a single mother after getting divorced.
You're causing trouble again. Don't drag us into your mess.
Dad scolded Ivy as she laughed it off. The children, seeing our father's anger, looked scared.
Dad, calm down. The kids are frightened. Sorry.
Dad said, calming down as he saw the children hiding behind their mothers. Thinking it wasn't good to continue the conversation in front of the children, I asked Sebastian to go to his room for a while.
So, Ivy, what do you plan to do now?
Mom asked once Sebastian was out of the room. I'll stay here. I can't raise Hannah by myself, Ivy declared. Our eyes then turned to little Hannah. She was watching us warily. She resembled her mother in her cute features. We couldn't bear the thought of turning away my anxious niece because of her mother, so we decided to welcome Ivy for the time being.
Thanks. I'll go buy some essentials for living.
Wait a minute.
But Ivy had already left, leaving us with a subdued Hannah and an awkward atmosphere.
I'm Sebastian Smith. What's your name? I'm Hannah Johnson. Nice to meet you. I've got some games, let's play.
That's when Sebastian kindly spoke to Hannah, breaking the tension. That helped Hannah to gradually let go of her caution. Following this, Ivy essentially began freeloading at our parents' house. Whenever I called, I'd hear how much she was troubling everyone.
Looks like going back to our parents' house isn't an option anymore,
I thought, feeling like I had lost my refuge. And now, unable to divorce Mark, I sighed. Sebastian looked up at me, concerned.
Why are you sighing?
One day, when I sighed, Mark asked what was wrong. I told him about Ivy, and all he said was, huh? His indifference to my worries was evident. He wasn't interested in listening seriously.
Why don't you just help your sister out?
Mark said to me, obviously not taking the situation seriously, and I couldn't help but feel annoyed. As I was about to retort, the doorbell rang.
Ah, there she is.
Ivy?
I exclaimed as I opened the door, only to find my sister and niece standing there. Apparently, Ivy had gotten our address from our parents and decided to drop by.
I've got something urgent to take care of. Please look after Hannah for me,
she said, leaving her daughter with us before I could even respond.
Wait a minute. Is that the infamous sister?
I called out, but she was already gone. And Mark showed up. He watched the whole scene unfold.
Yes, that's her.
I'll have a word with her when she comes to pick up Hannah.
Surprised by his words, I looked at Mark. I decided to let him handle it, though I was a bit surprised by his offer. Even though Ivy abruptly left Hannah with us, it meant we could avoid visiting Mark's parents' house. Sebastian kindly engaged with Hannah, and they started playing together, lightening the mood. I watched them play, wondering why Mark was in such a good mood.
Hey sis. Ivy's here to pick up Hannah. I'll handle it. You stay with Sebastian.
As it became dark outside, my sister arrived. Mark, who had taken care of Hannah, returned in an even better mood after dealing with her arrival.
She's quite understanding. Said it was just an emergency this time and she'll be more careful in the future.
Really? I replied, a bit skeptical, but after that day, Ivy stopped coming to our house. She also seemed to have calmed down at our parents' house. Meanwhile, Mark started working late and going on sudden business trips, saying I've been busy these days. Since Mark had explained to his parents that he was too busy to visit, I didn't have to go there anymore, but I still found it suspicious. It was right around that time.
Next weekend, I have to go on a business trip. It's going to be a bit longer this time.
Oh, really? Take care.
Mark was scheduled to go on a business trip for about a week. I said, smiling, though I still had my doubts.
Hey, can I come over?
I called my parents, learning that Ivy was away. I decided to take Sebastian and visit them. Sebastian immediately invited Hannah to play. It seemed that Hannah had warmed up to Sebastian, as she happily accepted his invitation with a smile.
Welcome back. I'm sorry we couldn't be of more help.
It's okay. I never expected Ivy to return like this.
Hey, you too. Look at the TV.
Dad suddenly called us over to the television. There was news of a plane crash.
How terrible. Looks like there are a lot of injured.
The victims had been rescued, but it seemed most of them were seriously injured. As my mother and I were expressing our concerns, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone.
Hello? Yes, Mark Smith is my husband. What? How come? What happened? It's Mark. He was on that plane and has been rushed to the hospital.
The call was from the hospital. I left Sebastian with my parents and hurried to the hospital. Amidst the plane crash, which resulted in some fatalities, it appeared that Mark had survived but sustained serious injuries.
I'm Mark Smith's wife.
Mrs. Smith, right this way, please.
A nurse guided me to his room. There was Mark, lying in the hospital bed.
Mark. Hey Hazel.
Surprisingly, Mark seemed quite lively. I asked for details. And I found out that he had become paralyzed from the waist down.
The worst part is that it was supposed to be a romantic trip with my lover.
Lover?
Yeah, didn't you realize?
The business trips were a lie.
His words left me frozen in shock. Mark, without any sign of remorse, continued. Both she and I are now paralyzed. You're the only one who can take care of us.
What are you talking about?
My concern for him vanished, replaced by disbelief and fading affection. At the same time, the affection for Mark also disappeared.
Please, take care of both of us.
I was utterly dismayed by what he said. It was absurd to think that he expected me to take care of his mistress as well.
Why don't you ask your parents?
What?
Make my elderly parents take care of us? You're heartless. Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be happy to do it, right? And what position are you in to say such things?
Despite being in a position to ask for help, Mark maintained his arrogant demeanor. It made me wonder why I ever fell for him.
Excuse me, coming through.
A new bed was wheeled in. I looked over and gasped in shock.
What? Ivy?
It was someone I knew all too well. She had apparently been brought to the same room because she was with Mark. The woman there, Mark's mistress who had been brought in alongside him, was none other than Ivy, my own sister. You were Mark's lover? I glared at her as she looked away. Mark, unabashed, explained. Ivy and he had exchanged contacts the day she left Hannah with us. And they had been meeting on his supposed overtime and business trips. Hearing this, my anger reached its peak.
So, you two betrayed us, got into a plane crash, and now you want me to take care of you? You've got some nerve,
I said, contemplating what to do next. Mark then spoke up reluctantly.
We're family, so you should help us out, right? Please, big sis.
Ivy added, both of them pleading with me. As they clung to me, I decided to speak my mind. I decided it was time to speak my mind.
To you, family seems to be just a convenience. It's not like that. So what do you consider a family, Mark? A father who doesn't actively participate in parenting and forces his son to go places he doesn't want to?
I countered, and Mark fell silent, finally realizing my anger. My gaze then turned to Ivy.
You've always wanted what others had, even going as far as stealing boyfriends, making everyone dislike you. And who's always had to clean up your mess? Me and our parents. Is that your idea of family? Well, at least you two won't be able to cheat anymore. Why don't you just stay together?
I suggested, both of them stunned by my anger. The nurses, who had been observing us, whispered among themselves.
I'll explain things to both families. But from now on, you need to figure things out yourselves,
I said and left the room. I then explained the situation to both families. My parents refused to take Ivy back, calling it her just deserts. It's enough, we can't deal with more, they said. Mark's parents, pitying their son, decided to take him in after some persuasion from his mother.
Oh, and I'm filing for divorce, so don't rely on me.
The in-laws pleaded with me to reconsider. It wasn't me who countered him, but Sebastian.
Grandma and Grandpa are the worst. You don't care about Mom at all.
His words turned Mark's mother pale. While she tried to make excuses, neither Sebastian nor I were interested in hearing more. Further investigation revealed that Mark had been unfaithful for a long time, starting around when I quit my job. The beginning of it all was around the time I left my job due to the marriage. He had suggested I take maternity leave because it made his affairs easier. The reason he wanted me to quit was that his affair partner worked at the same company, and quitting would prevent the affair from being discovered.
Felt quite taken for granted, haven't I?
I mused, taking the divorce papers and investigation results to the hospital. Mark and Ivy, now subdued and shunned. They, looked coldly by the nursing staff who were listening to our conversation, were taken aback when I arrived.
File this.
Wait! If you divorce me,
the in-laws will take care of you,
I replied, ignoring their pleas and proceeding with the divorce. I then returned home with Sebastian.
Now, the problem is,
left at our family home was Hannah. She was a victim in all this. So I discussed with my parents. Then my parents hired a detective to find Hannah's father. We eventually located Silas, Hannah's father, and arranged a meeting.
Thank you for contacting me. I've always been concerned about my daughter,
Silas said. It turns out that he and Ivy had divorced due to her infidelity. He had tried to claim custody, but a mediator believed the child should be with her mother. As a result, Silas lost custody.
About Ivy,
I explained Ivy's current situation to Silas. He apologized for any inconvenience caused. And to my surprise, he didn't seem like someone who would elope. So, I asked him about it. Actually, she first approached me using your name, Silas revealed. What? I was shocked. Apparently, Ivy had stolen my insurance card to get close to him. Ivy had deceived Silas and made contact with him under false pretenses. Then, after getting pregnant, she demanded they get married.
Though I was deceived, I did love Ivy. But more importantly, I still love my daughter, Hannah. I want to take custody of her.
I think it's best if you take care of her.
And then, I decided to entrust Hannah to Silas's care. When Silas and I returned to my parents' house with Hannah, she greeted him with a big smile and hugged him.
We'll be together from now on. Really? I'm so happy.
And they left smiling. With Hannah's safety secured, we decided to move. We thought it best not to stay at my parents' house as Mark and Ivy might come looking for us.
A detective told me that they actually visited the house once.
I had hired a detective to keep an eye on their movements. After being discharged, Mark and Ivy, pushed in wheelchairs by Mark's parents, had tried to visit my parents' house. And they found it empty, so they ended up at Mark's parents' house. Ivy was allowed to stay there because she was Mark's lover. But the elderly couple struggled to provide care, leading to constant arguments.
Well, that's to be expected.
Mark, Ivy, and even Mark's parents were all selfish. They always tried to enforce their will. There was a balance only because there were people who would tolerate it. Like me and my parents. We were no longer there, so conflict was inevitable.
Well, it's no longer my concern.
I had no sympathy for them. However, I needed to ensure everything was finalized legally. So I headed to a lawyer's office. A few days later, Sebastian and I went shopping.
I'm so happy to be shopping with you, Mom.
He said, his excitement evident due to our recent limited outings. As we enjoyed our time, I was suddenly approached by Ivy.
Sis!
When my sister called out to me, I was taken aback and froze, surprised. Seeing her struggling to push a wheelchair, I instinctively grabbed Sebastian's hand, ready to flee.
Where is Hannah? Isn't Hannah with you?
Ivy exclaimed. Given that her first concern was about Hannah, I decided to hear her out. We entered a nearby shop to talk.
At first, I was staying at Mark's place, but
Ivy was in a vulnerable position in that household. Consequently, she felt marginalized and seemed to be bearing the brunt of everyone's frustrations. Amidst this, she started worrying about Hannah. Once she started worrying about her, even though she knew she didn't have the right to see her, Ivy still longed to at least catch a glimpse of her and managed to escape from her in-laws' house. However, without a clear plan, Ivy was aimlessly wandering around the town.
That's when I heard Sebastian's voice.
She continued, explaining how it led her to us. She was anxious about not seeing Hannah and had approached us in her panic.
Hannah is with Silas now.
Ivy froze for a moment. Then she smiled in relief.
If she's with Silas, she'll be fine. Have you thought about what you're going to do now?
There's someone who's willing to help me. This person was a friend she met during her elopement. Her friend worked at a support facility and arranged for Ivy to stay there for a while. Apparently, she had escaped just before someone was scheduled to pick her up the next day. When I called, I got scolded for acting recklessly, but they said they would still come to pick me up. To Ivy, who said this, I presented a document. This is a list of jobs suitable for wheelchair users. What's this?
I know you're going through a tough time, but I will be seeking alimony. I see you're remorseful, so I'll allow installment payments. Find yourself a job. Okay, I'm sorry.
After her friend arrived, Ivy left with the friend. I thought maybe she could still turn her life around.
Sorry for the delay. Let's go shopping,
I said to Sebastian, and we left the shop. As we were leaving, we ran into Mark. His parents were nearby, possibly searching for Ivy, and stumbled upon us instead.
What do you want? Come on, let's get back together. A family should be together, right? Stop joking. I have no intention of going back to you.
Unlike my sister, Mark called out to me out of self-preservation. Disappointed by his self-serving attitude, I glared at him.
I expect a lump sum for the alimony and child support. I'm embarrassed that you're my dad.
Faced with our cold attitude, Mark froze. We turned our backs on him and left.
In comparison, Ivy seems better.
I thought as Sebastian and I focused on our shopping.
Hazel! Sebastian!
Mark called out, but his voice no longer reached me. Later, with the help of a lawyer, I filed for alimony against both of them. Ivy began to pay the alimony. Apparently, she was struggling with a new life and an unfamiliar job. She said she received only minimal help from the friend she had mentioned.
I remember, Ivy used to be so sweet and genuine when she was little.
Perhaps being pushed to her limits, she had reverted somewhat to her former self. On the other hand, Mark, who was faced with a lump sum alimony demand, also had a hard time. He eventually had to sell his parents' house and use all of their retirement funds to pay the lump sum alimony I demanded.
Am I too harsh?
After all, he was paralyzed from the waist down.
You don't need to worry about it. Right. You simply claimed your rightful dues.
My parents reassured me, sensing my slight guilt over the situation. Hannah, now living with Silas, seemed to be happy. According to Silas, she was fond of Sebastian, who had been kind to her. This news brought a smile to my face. Sometime later, I received a letter from Silas. It contained excerpts from a letter Ivy had written to him.
I always wanted to be like my big sister. But I realized I could never be her, leading me to self-destructive choices. However, I truly fell in love with you, Silas, and genuinely love Hannah.
The letter ended with, I don't deserve to see Hannah or my sister ever again. It seemed that Ivy would not appear before me again. It was her self-imposed punishment.
Mom, can I go to my friend's house today?
Sure, but make sure you come back before it's late. Even in our new home, Sebastian was making friends and enjoying school. Let's continue to live a peaceful life with our cherished family. With these thoughts in mind, I watched Sebastian energetically run off.